Okay, David, we're into the last set of 7 unnumbered visions,
Right.
and we've heard a vision of the coming of the Messiah,
Right.
whenever that takes place. And now we have, at the beginning of chapter 20, an image of a millennial kingdom.
Yeah.
What do you make of this millennium? And
Yeah,
do you
well,
observe?
my sense is, and obviously this has been much controverted in the history of Christians, people thinking it's come, it is yet to come, we are standing before it, we are standing after it. My sense is it continues something of the kind of dualism we've had all the way along, which is that there's a heavenly reality going on and an earthly reality yet to be consummated, and that this has more to do with the continuing reign in heaven of the Lamb and of the saints until the final consummation when the New Jerusalem comes and the new heaven and the new earth. So it's not, once again, it's not so much a timetable as a kind of tapestry or this world, that world, contrasted one to the other. But I don't pretend to have the secret.
So in sort of chronological readings
Yeah.
of the symbolism of the book of Revelation,
Yeah.
the millennium tends to come after the coming of the Messiah.
It does, right.
And so when you date the coming of the Messiah from back there in chapter 19, verse 11, might have something
Yeah,
to do with...
so if you date the coming of the Messiah with the coming of the Messiah first time around, then we're into it. If you're waiting for yet another coming, then we're waiting for it.
Right. Yeah, there are certain people who exercise a judgmental role in this kingdom. Chapter 20, verse 4. Who are they, and what's going on with them?
They are the witnesses, the martyrs, the ones who have been, in this case, beheaded, but I'm sure it includes a whole range of ways of being martyred for the faith. And we said all the way along that the witnesses are the triumphant ones, that the witnesses share in the reign of the King and the reign of the Lamb, and here they represent authority over the earth from heaven, I take it. I assume that this is part of their...
So the visionary sees thrones in heaven, and
Visionary
those who
sees
are
thrones in
seated
heaven and on the thrones of the
martyrs.
martyrs, and the martyrs continue to rule with the Lamb.
Right. So far, so good. I'm following you, but it talks about a sequence of resurrections
Yeah.
and deaths. What's going on
Yeah.
with that?
My sense is the second resurrection, the second death, is what we have traditionally, those of us who read Paul or Mark, think of as the kind of the final judgment, the time when all the dead are raised and final judgment is pronounced. And that the first death has to do with the death in the meantime. When someone we love dies, that's the first death. The second death is that triumphal
Judgment. And
judgment.
Maybe condemnation.
Maybe
today.
condemnation, trumpets, the whole shebang. Yeah.
And what about the first resurrection?
First resurrection is, what a good question. I go back and forth on whether this has to do with a sense that there's an ongoing life in the meantime for the saints, or whether the first resurrection is life in the church, whether that's the place where we live out our resurrected life waiting for the final consummation, or maybe both.
Could be both. I'm brought to mind of the saying in Paul in Romans and also in Colossians, connecting baptism and resurrection.
Yeah.
And there are slightly
could be
different
raised
takes
into
on
that life in that way. Yeah.
So there's a kind of resurrection that's an experience of any Christian who participates somehow
very
in the
nice.
death and resurrection of
Very
Christ.
nice. And in those hymns you sing that echo the heavenly hymns,
Right,
that's a kind of resurrection
Yeah,
celebration.
there's a lot of participation in
Yeah,
the life
huge-
and death of
huge
Christ
amount of
throughout
it.
the book
Yeah,
of
huge amount of it.
Revelation.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be surprising if there's a
No,
gesture
it
to
wouldn't.
that
It
notion
wouldn't.
too. So that would be a nice, neat way of thinking about it, wouldn't it? The first resurrection is a kind of metaphorical,
Yeah.
spiritual thing. The
Second
second
resurrection
death is a kind of metaphorical thing.
Yeah.
It's the final judgment.
Yeah.
First death is real physical
Goodbye,
death.
yeah.
Second,
Second death is-
second resurrection is real resurrection.
Right, exactly.
In traditional
Yeah,
Christian
yeah,
terms.
yeah. Something like that, I think.
Something like that might
yeah,
work.
Yeah.
Okay, in any case, at the end of the 1,000 years, Satan gets released. He's been thrown down from on high, according to chapter 12, and now he's released, and Gog and Magog come along. Who are Gog and Magog?
Gog and Magog come straight out of Ezekiel, and they are the enemies who go to battle against the saints. And I have no idea beyond that whether we can specify them. Was there somebody particularly in mind, or is this once again a symbolic way of talking about evil as the beast was, the whore was? I'm not sure.
So maybe those forces from on the other side
Maybe
of the
those forces from the other
Euphrates is
side.
possible,
Maybe the eastern, the
or
troops
maybe something
from the
symbolic.
east. Yeah.
In any case, the false prophet gets ditched here too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so there's a final victory over all of the forces of
All
evil.
the
and
forces of
whatever
evil,
force,
religious,
whatever form
commercial,
we
and
encounter
political.
them.
Yeah.
Right. And then the final part of this vision is the great white throne and the one who sat on it, and heaven and earth are in front of him and all of that. And we have real resurrection here, right? The
Real
sea
resurrection
giving up
here.
its death.
Satan's second departure.
Right.
That I was going to ask you about that. What's your sense of that? The devil comes back for a short shot before the final doom.
Yeah, well, I think this is yet another recognition on the part of our author that the end is not yet.
Yeah.
That there's a kind of overlap in hoped for time and real time. And the devil
Satan's
is
still
around.
showing his claws or whatever.
Yeah, and if the millennium is, as you suggested, the reality of the church in the present, then it's not surprising that the devil is somehow restrained by it, but not yet finally defeated.
That's nice. Yeah, that works very nicely.
So after the sequence, then we see the new heaven and the new earth.
Yeah.
And we see the new city of Jerusalem coming down from heaven, a new haven, as it were.
As it were.
Yes.
Nicely done, yes.
Right. And the founders of New Haven had this passage in mind, didn't they?
Of course they did. Right.
In any case, we see the new heaven and the new earth. And what's going on here? Because the vision goes on and on, doesn't it?
It does.
Chapter 21 and
It
chapter
does,
22.
hugely.
And it gets a little more complicated in 21:9, right, where we have the bride of the Lamb.
Yeah. My sense is that what it tries to do is, in a sense, reverse the images we've had before. Corrupt city replaced by blessed city, corrupt whore replaced by bride of Lamb. You almost take all the things that were negative and do their reversal and say, here's what the end will look like. The end will look like all that turned upside down. But new heaven and new earth, not new heaven off somewhere else. We're not really raptured
right.
here.
There's no doctrine of the rapture.
There's no doctrine of the rapture here.
Book of Revelation.
It all comes to us. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this notion of a new Jerusalem, where does our author get that idea from? Is that a biblical?
Well, certainly a lot of that in Ezekiel.
Ezekiel,
The idea of the new temple and the new Jerusalem, and I think he plays on that. And I think some of the actual description of the stones and stuff are Ezekiel based. I mean, it's very interesting because. Our author is very deeply literate biblically, but he's not literalist. He doesn't simply repeat it. He's perfectly willing to do riffs on the familiar scenes and redo them to his own purposes, which is interesting when you try to think about how scriptural authority worked for the first century for these people. It was there, but not to be slavishly imitated.
So there's a new Jerusalem to be hoped for, and the author sees it coming
Yep.
down from heaven.
Yep.
And it's a holy city. Is he thinking of a literal city here, or is this a symbol for something else?
I wish I knew. I think it's certainly related to the life of the church and the ongoing life of faith. Whether it's supposed to be a real city or not, I don't know.
So what do you base that on? The 12 apostles of the Lamb? In verse
the 12
14?
apostles of the Lamb seem to be related to the ongoing life of the church.
Yeah,
If they really are
I take that very seriously.
the foundation upon which the church is built. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it looks like he's taking the image from Ezekiel of a physically reconstructed Jerusalem, which was what Ezekiel hoped for, and converting it to a symbol of
to an
the life of the church.
ecclesiastical, churchy Jerusalem.
Right,
Yeah.
which overlaps nicely with what we were saying about the millennial kingdom in the previous set of visions. And this is the same phenomenon we've seen time and again, the recapitulation or repetition of a visionary insight using different images.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
I think these two images point to the
here they
same
come
thing.
again. No, that's exactly right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly right.
And this is a four-square city like the city of Ezekiel, and also like New Haven.
Yes,
Four-square city.
exactly.
Right.
Very heavy on New Haven imagery, actually.
It is indeed. So there's a certain amount of other evocation going on here of other biblical texts. I think Genesis is an important part of this, right?
Yeah.
In the description of the life of
The river of life of the tree. And here the river of life is not in a garden but in a city, which I think something about the urban person in me thinks that's kind of nice, that you start with a garden and move to the city, and you can have grace in the city as well as in the garden. I like that. And then the sense of the kind of blessing, curse, word, invocation at the very end.
Yeah. But before we get to that, we have a scene of worship, right?
We do.
And what's unusual about this worship? Is it taking place in the ordinary worship space?
No, and it's taking place on earth, and the nations are coming to worship as well.
And there is no temple.
And there is no temple.
No temple, and they say.
Because the Lamb himself is the temple.
That's right. So what do you think this is all about?
The fading away of the various blessed structures by which we try to hold worship together, and when we're in the presence of God Almighty and in the presence of the Lamb, then worship is what we do, not what we're instructed to do. It's who we are. It's not.
Yeah, I think of it in part historically. That is, the author, good Jew that he thinks he is, looks on the destruction of the temple in 70
that can't be
AD,
it.
and what do you do in a situation like
that's a
that?
good point.
The rabbis said, well, we replace it with prayer and deeds of loving kindness. And I think our author is saying something similar.
Yeah, but Christ.
We replace it with our presence, the presence of Christ within us, and our presence with Him.
Very nice.
So I think there's that going on. Like all of my Catholic brethren, however, I look at those 12 apostles and the structure that they build and think about the worship that takes place within that church.
Of course.
In any case, it is a vision of Christian life that's being sketched here.
I think so. Yeah.
A vision that's so optimistic and so powerful. Genesis, the Garden of Eden, is being recreated in our midst, in the midst of our worship.
Yeah. And in this world that looks a lot like Babylon.
That's right.
Still,
Yeah.
I mean, this is coming, and it's on the way, but it's not here yet. So we live under its light, but we don't pretend that Babylon's not still flaunting around the edges.
Right. How about these final remarks? And so the visions tend to end at chapter 22, verse 7.
Yeah.
And then we get the voice of our seer speaking again. I, John, am the one who heard and saw these things, etc. Are there any important things that come from his final comments to us?
My sense is it largely reiterates what we've had before and does it more in the imperative than the indicative. I'm not going to show you anymore. I'm going to tell you, wash up, fly straight.
Right. I like the command in verse 9, worship God. That picks up this liturgical dimension that we've been talking about. And the basis on which that worship is founded in verse 12, I'm coming soon. There is some sort of eschatological hope.
And the reminder
maybe
that this is all Jesus dictating it, right?
Yeah.
In 16, it's I,
Jesus. But finally, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. All of this guy's hopes, all of our hopes are grounded in that.
Gathered in that Alpha and Omega.
Yep, I think that's...
So that's
that is
the Omega of this book.
Indeed.
Thank you, sir.